A lot of CEOs tell me the same thing. We're investing in AI, but the organization isn't moving any faster. That's not a tech problem. It's an organizational one. Learn what's getting in the way at leaderbook.ai.
Hey, I think that you should consider getting out of Ukraine for a little bit. And he's like, why? I'm like, because the tensions with Russia. And he's like, oh, Spencer, you're overblowing the situation. I think you're being propagandized a little too much by the American media. And we've always had some tensions with Russia. And he grew up in a city on the eastern side called Kharkiv. So he's always been in proximity to Russia, and he's Russian speaking. And, nothing's really going to happen. And then after, a few days, I sort of was able to convince him, like, hey, look, here's the reality, which is that why don't you just take a vacation, go to Poland, get an Airbnb, stay there for a month. And if nothing happens and you're totally right, I'll eat my words, then you go back.
I'm Felicia Shakiba, and this is Leaderbook AI, where we solve a business challenge in every episode. How does a founder build the first team? Find them, evaluate them, earn their trust, and lead them through uncertainty when the company is still fragile and the stakes are deeply personal. Today we have Spencer Penn, CEO and co-founder of LightSource. Welcome, Spencer.
Thanks for having me, Felicia. I'm excited for the conversation.
Spencer, take me back to the very beginning, before the funding, before the offices, before the team of 60, which you have. What was the original problem you felt compelled to solve?
Yeah, it's a great question. But to go to the beginning, I was born on August 14th at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. But in all seriousness, just for some context, LightSource is a procurement AI company. And so we help companies like automotive manufacturers, consumer electronics, find suppliers and buy from them more strategically. You can kind of think of us a little bit like Salesforce, but in reverse. So instead of helping sales teams find customers and sell to them, we help the corporate procurement function find vendors and buy from them. So instead of deal cards, like you might be familiar with, we have like procurement workflows. But I certainly did not know very much about procurement growing up. I mean, I don't think I knew the function even existed. So I would say the beginning, if we want to go really to the beginning, is when I was at Tesla back over 10 years ago. I helped lead a program there called the Model 3, which was Tesla's first mass market electric car. And we struggled with a lot of things. I think Tesla's scaling challenges are not just internally known. I think they're quite public. And one of the big pain points that I noticed was that we were sourcing $30 billion of car parts using spreadsheets and emails. And that just drove me nuts. And so tried to find some kind of software that would help us do our work better and faster. And was sort of shocked to discover there wasn't really anything that good at the time. And frankly, still not now outside of LightSource. And then I left Tesla, and to go to business school. And I went to Harvard Business School. I adore the institution. And I was in a class that was sort of oriented around creating startups and conceptualizing ideas. And I sent my professor an email with like 5 or 6 different ideas. One of them was something like LightSource. One of them was something else. And then one of them was like a liposuction car. So you could both lose weight and be more sustainable. I don't know. I just was throwing a bunch of ideas at the wall to see what would stick. And ultimately, like he thought that the idea around building procurement AI was really effective and interesting, and so we went with it. And as I started to build it out for the class, I kind of had this realization that this wasn't just a Tesla problem. This was like across many companies, and that there was actually not a good player in the space today, and we could actually make a bona fide attempt at solving it. And that was just the granule of the start. I think ultimately, in order to have the confidence to go and pursue a company, I wasn't even there quite yet, to be honest. A lot of times people think, oh, you're a founder, you go and just like jump ship immediately, burn the bridges, that kind of thing. That was not me at that time. I still took yet another job. I was a PM at Waymo. And throughout that time, I still felt like, okay, this idea is very real. And I started getting this sort of gnawing feeling in my stomach that if I don't go build this, somebody else will, and I'm never going to forgive myself for not trying. But I didn't have the other pieces in mind yet. So I knew sort of the problem we wanted to solve. I had a hypothesis about what that product could be. And then the other two pieces really need to click into place, which was one, finding a great co-founder, which I did in my CTO, Adon. He was a engineer at Google X, or Google Research and Google X, which are like sort of the birthplace of the LLM. While I was a PM at Waymo, so we were both in this sort of R&D echelon of the Alphabet universe, and then also finding great investors who wanted to back us. And when those two other elements clicked into place, then it was what the lawyers call res ipsa. It was completely self-evident that this was the path to take, and I've not looked back since. I hope that's what you're looking for, but that's sort of the origin story. And now we've scaled from 2 folks in a garage to a team of 64 offices across the United States. So.
Well, thank you for taking the leap of faith and trying something new. I know that is, a founder's biggest challenge is to break away from the everyday consistency and do something that they have no idea if it would work or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I also feel like every founder talks about the first believers. Who were your first believers and what did it take to convince the very first people that this company was worth betting their lives on?
Do you mean first believers from like a customer perspective or from an employee perspective?
Both.
Okay. Because by the way, the earliest customers are also betting their careers and lives on you. I think this is sort of underrated. But if someone in corporate America signs up for software tool that creates great value for the business, it's sort of a coin flip if they're rewarded or acknowledged for it. But if things go horribly wrong, they're definitely in trouble if there's data leaks or problems or frictions with suppliers. So I think there's a lot of people that had to take risks on us. And I actually have a huge amount of appreciation for folks on all the surfaces, our investors, our early customers, and our employees, because everyone's making an effort. The earliest customers and the earliest employees, I think typically in most businesses, they come from your personal network. Because when you're going and saying, hey, I'm starting this company called LightSource, there's not very much there yet by definition. You've not built very much. You don't have the validation from the market. You certainly don't have customer case studies that you can rely on. And your promise is not that you have a great product. The promise is that you have the seed of a product, but then with their help and co-development, you're going to build them a great product and they're going to be along for the journey, which is fun to see, but also get some kind of long-term preferential pricing or benefits or be able to put their thumb on the scale from a roadmap perspective. So our earliest customers were folks that I had known in my previous life, people who I'd worked with at Tesla, people that I had worked with at Goldman Sachs, who were now CFOs of various companies. Often they were more senior at the time. Like a lot of times it's just the career progression. Like, when I was at Tesla, I was like a newly minted workforce member. And then, and then these folks were really senior and, trying to stay in touch with them is really important. And then they believe in you and that's what gets them motivated. Now, the early employees, it's sort of a similar thing. You have to, people are smart. And, I think there's this perception that founders paint like a grandiose vision and then people just flock to them. It's not the way it works. I think you have to be what I would call pragmatically optimistic. And so it's not about hyperbole. It's about understanding something that is deep and true about a specific problem or market, having a coherent and concrete plan that you believe you can execute against to win that market, lay that plan out in a way that somebody can come to their own conclusion about whether or not that's feasible, and then invite them to be part of doing it. And if those things line up, then they'll join. In our case, though, our earliest employee outside of Idan was actually this guy who was in Ukraine at the time, back in 2021. It's funny, we found him. This was the only person we ever hired in this way, so it's kind of anomalous. But Idan, our CTO, was more back-end focused, and we wanted someone who was a little bit more design, for first engineering hire, design and UI focused. And so I was kind of naive, and I think that you can be sometimes lucky and naive. And I looked for GitHub repos, which is the open source, one of the open source, agoras. And I looked for, what's the most popular front end, web frameworks. And at the time, and still now, Material UI is one of the, I think there's a million forks and, a million stars, and 80% of, websites at that time were built using Material UI. And I just looked at who are the three biggest contributors, and I reached out to this guy who's now been on our team for 4 years. I just sent him an inbound email, and he responded, and he was open to having a conversation. And we did an interview, and we hired him, and he's been with us since then. And now he's been amazing.
Wow. And you said he's from Ukraine, right?
Yeah, that's correct. He's from Ukraine, although to be fair, he has had a kind of a rough couple of years. As you know, the situation in Ukraine from 21 to present has not been what I would call smooth sailing, but he is particularly lucky. He's been able to emigrate here to the United States, and he now lives here in San Francisco, and I see him in the office every day, and his mom came to visit this weekend. I don't know if I should share this story, but I'll tell you a little bit of detail. He got extremely lucky. It was actually, he got out of Ukraine right before the border was closed. And the story is pretty simple. My mom actually knew that he was in Ukraine, and she called me, and, my mom's an amazing woman. She also has great intuition, and she's also a worrier. And my mom called me and said, "Hey, is Danny still in Ukraine?" And I said, "Yeah, why?" And she said, "Well, because there's all this news about tensions with Russia and blah, blah, blah." And I thought that she was maybe exaggerating, but I had seen the news, and the US was starting to sort of pull some diplomats out, which is always a bad sign. And so it was first my mom convinced me that, that his safety was potentially at risk. And so then I contacted him and said, "Danny, hey, I think that you should potentially consider getting out of Ukraine for a little bit." And he's like, "Why?" I'm like, because the tensions with Russia. And he's like, "Oh, Spencer, you're overblowing the situation. I think you're being propagandized a little too much by the American media." And we've always had some tensions with Russia. And he grew up in a city on the eastern side called Kharkiv. So he's always been in proximity to Russia, and he's Russian speaking. And, nothing's really going to happen. And then after, a few days, I sort of was able to convince him, "Hey, look, here's the reality, which is that why don't you just take a vacation, go to Poland, get an Airbnb, stay there for a month. And if nothing happens, and you're totally right, I'll eat my words, then you go back. And if something does happen, you'll be happy that you're out." And that kind of logic, I think, really landed with him. And then so we started planning, right? So I remember going to the office on a Sunday and drawing out for him sort of a war room style plan, because I'm ex-Tesla, you're very operations oriented. How do you move money out of your bank account to a foreign bank account? How are you going to get permission to go into these other countries and stay? Where are you going to stay? We were during COVID, by the way, so there's things like timing of vaccines and quarantine requirements. And then the plan was for him to leave on March 1st. And then I was at a wedding actually in Boston, and a friend of mine, I was telling her all about the story, and she's like, "I think you should get out this weekend." And I'm like, "This weekend?" And she's like, yeah. Have you seen the news? They pulled the diplomat out of the consulate. They're flying them back to the United States. And I was like, I messaged him at this wedding at the dinner table being like, "Hey, I think you should go this weekend." And he changed his plans. He packed up his car. He packed up all his stuff, his dog. And he crossed the border on February 23rd, and he got to Poland. And then on February 24th, the following day, there was a barrage of missiles and attacks. It was a blitzkrieg from the Russians to sort of overwhelm Ukraine. They shut down the border, and every man from the age of 16 to 60 was conscribed into the military. And Danny was totally in shock. Rightfully so. And not too long after, his mom met him at the border, and he was able to get her out. But the timing was so remarkable that even his landlord back in Lviv asked him if he was working for the Russians, because he knew nobody else that had left literally the day before with all their stuff, driven their car and their family sort of out of the country. And so since then, it's been a few years of, and this is, it's been a few years of working with him and our immigration attorney. We have an amazing immigration law firm that we work with here in the Bay Area to make sure that he's safe. And he lived in Dusseldorf, Germany for 2 years. And then finally, this past year, he was awarded an O1 visa, which is the Einstein visa. And frankly, he is extremely deserving of this. And I think it was really smart to give him this opportunity. But he's able to come to the United States. He just had a daughter recently. She's a U.S. citizen, and he's been an amazing contribution to our company. And so these are the kinds of things that you don't always think about. I know this is a little bit, maybe I'm going a little bit, Felicia, a little bit into the left field over here. It's like you're asking about like recruiting and managing engineering teams, and I'm telling you about like international politics and immigration law. But I'm really happy, and I think this is the kind of things that it's like, okay, no matter what happens with LightSource, and I love the company, and I feel we're going to be very successful. But I feel that it's, if I can, in my position as a CEO and founder, have a kind of positive impact on some of the people I work with, especially to this degree, which is anomalous, then I can sleep really happily at night.
Spencer, I think this is not a separate subject. I think it is the subject that people don't normally speak about, but it is the most authentic, right? Because recruiting is not just about who can do the job. It's about who do you want to go through the trenches with? And who better to do that with than someone that you completely build the utmost trust with? And what better way to build trust than to make sure that people are still alive, right? I mean, what an incredible story. I mean, it is the uniqueness of the story that tells, what leaders really need to do to dig their heels in and build trust in a way that makes sure that people feel like you as a leader have their back. And I can't imagine that, Danny would have your back, considering what all of the magic you pulled out of your hat in order to get him here and protect him and his life and his family. Right?
Absolutely. I mean, it was really amazing. I mean, I would sort of start making out like some of these decision trees for him, which is like, okay, he's in Poland today. Are there US routes? And this is back in 22. Could he go to Canada? Can he go to the EU? If so, like which country? What sort of statuses are available? And this was also a moving target because there were new statuses being made available to folks leaving Ukraine in countries like Germany and Czechia and et cetera. And so, we were really quite involved in making sure that he was safe. And I do think that there is, like, obviously, this is an extreme situation, but I do agree with you, Felicia, which is that if you are loyal to your people, like, I think they will be loyal back. And if you're honest with your people, they will be honest back. If you create a psychologically safe environment for your people, they will feel that they have the room to be creative and to grow. It's sort of one of these funny things, like, part of the reason that Vladimir Putin never, was so, I think, miscalculated in the initial war effort was that his generals were sort of afraid to tell him exactly what the reality was, boots on the ground. I never want my team to feel that way. I want them to always feel that, look, I've got their best interests in heart, and within the business, but also outside the business. This was not my main job. This was nights and weekends. I will go to bat for them. And if they know that, then they never have to double check that. And if I ever talk to Danny again, and say, hey, what do you think about this? And, are you seeing this? Whatever it might be within the business, I know he'll always be very honest with me. And I appreciate that. And, we're bonded for life, I would say.
We'll be right back.
Hi there. I'm Peter Zollman. I'm a co-host of the Inside Job Boards and Recruitment Marketplaces podcast.
And I'm Stephen Rothberg, and I guess that makes me the other co-host.
Every other week, we're joined by guests from the world's leading job sites.
Together, we analyze news about general, niche, and aggregator job board and recruitment marketplaces sites.
Make sure you sign up and subscribe today.
Back to the show. I mean, I would hope so. That is a wild story. And I also feel like, you are also risking your own life, your career, your world on someone that, may or may not make it, right, to the US or be able to support his own family. I mean, I didn't know the situation, but you also took a risk. And he, I think, saw that. I would assume that, but I think that the more you as a leader, like the bottom line is that the more you can build trust with your team and and that involves, seeing them as humans and people, not just as your
Mm-hmm.
employees that work from whatever time to, or get things done, or can they execute or not. It's really about, I am working with other humans. They also have lives. And the more time that we can consider and have the empathy for how do we make them successful, well, it's really about how do we make their lives successful? How do we
Mm-hmm.
make them as humans successful? But that, I feel like people really recognize the difference between leaders who treat them as employees and leaders who treat them as humans, as part of the solution. And that
Mm-hmm.
makes the biggest difference.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, absolutely. You're preaching to the choir here, Felicia.
Are you tearing up here? I mean, I feel
No.
like
I have shed tears in this situation.
yeah.
No doubt. I mean, no doubt. I don't think that I'm not like a big crier, but certainly, when Danny first got to the United States on his on his O1, I definitely was very happy about that. And I think that it's sort of one of these things, where I feel like, he's given me a very big gift. And this is going to sound kind of weird because I feel like it's rare that people have the opportunity sort of to help somebody in such a bona fide way. And I feel personally like really good about being able to help him. And he's given like me and everyone in our company an opportunity to do something good. I kind of feel like I'm just like the vessel by which I don't know. I don't know. I feel like it's like almost like I don't have, I'm not a very religious person, but I sometimes feel like, okay, like I was just, just letting God's work happen through me to some degree. And, yeah, I know that sounds very, very out there, but, you know, I'm just happy that I was able to help him get situated. And, it's a real blessing to me that I get to be part of helping him in the way that we did. But it's not for nothing. I mean, look, the reason he got an O1 was not because, I gave him a good immigration lawyer or we sponsored him. It was because he had for years been like a legitimate thought leader in the field. And even outside of his work, had done conferences, had done podcasts, had written blogs, white papers, truly maintained and like was the second largest contributor to like the biggest front end, framework used by millions of people. And so I do believe that there's also this element of like you do make your own luck. And like if he had not been so good, I wouldn't have found him. If I had not been open to him or vice versa, then we wouldn't have started working together. If he hadn't done such good work in our first year and change of working together, then maybe he wouldn't have still been around to the point where that sort of the rubber met the road and he was able to get out. So I do think that there's luck involved in a lot of this stuff. And I also think that, people will make their own luck. I'm always processing this stuff. I don't have all the answers. I'm just happy I was able to help him out. I'm happy he's happy. And I'm happy that his, beautiful daughter that was born like a month or two ago is like healthy and secure and a US citizen. All that stuff's really a blessing for me to see. But I will tell you at the flip side, there's also something that's also kind of hard, which is that like sometimes as a leader, you have to do things that are hurtful to certain people in order to help other people within the business. And like what I mean by that is that, like we've also had to over the the fullness of time have had to let people go for things like performance reasons. You put somebody on a performance improvement plan, and you help your intention obviously should be, and it is, to say, hey, look, here's where the bar is, here's where you're at, and we want to help give you the resources and support to get there. And if they do, it's great, but if they don't, you have to cut bait, and that can be a very painful conversation. So as much as for Danny, LightSource has been like an amazing, frankly, like life-changing, life-altering kind of adventure, I'll put it that way. There's also people in the company or who are no longer at the company who would say like, look, I had a really hard conversation with Spencer or some of the managers in the business, and I was like let go, and that was painful. And, you feel for those people, absolutely. But balancing off like, pruning the tree to keep the bonsai really healthy overall is a balance, because, if somebody's not performing, it's not good for them. They're ultimately not very happy. We feel like we're micromanaging them. We don't want to be like that. They know that they're struggling. It's never a surprise. Very rarely it's a surprise. And I have 59 other people in the company that are shareholders, that are dependent on me for their livelihoods, their careers, their stock price, all that sort of stuff, the welfare of their spouses and kids. And so I think that being a leader also sometimes means making hard decisions, but ultimately, like, you have to have some kind of like stack rank of values and just like understand what those are, communicate those with people and keep them consistent. And then your behavior has to line up with those values. And if you do that, then you can always go to sleep feeling really, really, really happy. And so for me, whether things happen or don't happen in the business, I tell people this in the company too. As long as you come in every day, give it 110% with a positive attitude and live by your values, I can never be disappointed in you. I also would not be disappointed in myself.
We'll be right back. Back to the show. Spencer, I feel like a great sense of like pride for you. Like, I'm very proud to see that there are leaders out there that like speak my language around people. I have a very similar story.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Like, I've grown up around entrepreneurs. Like, my dad was an entrepreneur. All my cousins, like, they've all had their own businesses. They actually all came from Iran.
Wow.
But yeah, like, that's a whole nother episode.
Yeah.
But, I was walking around my family's offices, and I would see that their biggest challenges, and how, there were people that stayed with them for 30 years because they felt so committed. But at the same time, I also knew that the people who some of those people who were staying, it wasn't healthy for the business. It wasn't healthy for them as individuals and for their families, because they weren't reaping the rewards of feeling like their values aligned with what they wanted to do, or their skill sets. And so for me, like, that was the spark that got me into truly understanding like the psychology and the science behind work and people. And one of my missions in life is just to help people find, where they're supposed to be, and help leaders find the people that they're supposed to be with, right? Because that is like the constant struggle that we all go through, is making sure that there's alignment between values and skill sets and the future of the business and the needs of the business. And healthy business is, a lot of healthy lives and like people, right? So, that's one of the reasons why the show exists, right?
Yeah, of course.
We could talk about this forever, but
can I ask you a question, Felicia, actually?
Of course, yeah.
You meet with a lot of leaders. The podcast is obviously focalized around that. I'm curious, what are your observations, specifically some of the biggest differences you've seen between what I would call like new leaders, people who are burgeoning in their career, versus experienced managers? What are the kinds of differences you see in terms of either mentality or the way they've shifted over time? Again, between like the seasoned exec and like the newly minted founder in terms of their leadership style.
It's a great question. And I don't know if I would separate so much new leaders from like more experienced leaders, because I've seen a lot of experienced leaders don't even get the basics, unfortunately. It's true. That is the reality of my experience. I think it really has to do with how mature your mindset is. And like I said, like, I've seen new leaders who are just like, wow, I'm blown away at how they're thinking about building their business. I would say that, you're not like a new leader, but you're not, you haven't grown yet to, thousands and hundreds and thousands of people. But I would say that, you probably have like the know-how more than extremely experienced leaders do. I think that like, the more experienced leaders who are successful are those who are truly looking at the values and how they show up in the business and how to ensure that those behaviors go not just all the way down to the new hire or the IC, but also across the business is a constant. That is a constant adaptation and transparency that you are constantly building, because the business should be always adapting and moving, right? Because as the business grows, you have different requirements, you have different needs, you have a lot going on in macro environment, the political environment, the space, AI. I mean, there's just this constant adaptation, and you have to constantly think about, how do I realign? How do I realign my values, these behaviors? How does this definition of this skill change? And if you're not on the forefront of communicating and behaving in that way, that's when things really start to crumble. So you just really need this, I think, like, just to answer your question, between less mature mindset versus the more mature mindset of leadership. It's really about, how do I continuously reinforce the values and skills that are needed and communicate that so people are aligned. I know it was like a big response to your question.
Yeah, of course.
That is what I'm thinking.
It's
Yeah.
thoughtful. I mean, it inspires like a lot of other sort of thoughts for me too, because I feel like one of the biggest, I don't know, I would call it like malaise in the founder community, is that there's a lot of celebritization around certain iconic tech founders who are also, egomaniacs or narcissists or just not empathetic leaders. And like, look, I have a huge amount of respect for my former boss, Elon Musk. I think he's an incredible entrepreneur. I don't think anyone looks at him and says, this is like a lovely guy to, chill with, or that, he'll consider all of your personal circumstances when making, hiring and firing decisions. And so I think it is sometimes a little bit difficult, especially for younger managers who are early in career, myself included, actually. I think myself I feel very early and very young, to square between like the ultra successful entrepreneurs being notoriously challenging, opinionated, sometimes brash and brazen, versus like what you might feel like you internally should be the way that you want to operate. And my 2 cents on this personally, and I'd be curious to get your thoughts, are that there's a big positive selection bias. And so if you think about the top 10 most famous entrepreneurs, yeah, maybe they are very, very controversial, very, very iconoclastic, and they have gone against conventional wisdom, and they were right. But for every one of them, there are thousands of people who took the same mindset and squandered the opportunities or turned people in their company or their investors or customers away. And so maybe there's like a small echelon of like 100 billion plus, net worth people who, maybe they started or have earned the sort of, to their mind, the right to act in certain ways. But there's so many companies out there, and there's so many executives and CEOs that I interact with, whether they're customers or partners or just other folks in the enterprise level, in the mid-market level, where I just don't think that, I think that empathetic leadership does win. Of course, not at the expense of like top level business thinking, strategy, and execution. But I think there is this tendency for us to look at who's giving the speech at, Stanford's commencement and say, that's the good advice. Of course, that person's going to talk about, their experience. There may have been 100 others who did the same thing, didn't get there, aren't talking about it. And so the numbers may not pan out or pencil out the way you think. And so that's just my sort of thought, but I'm curious to hear your perspective, like, because there's definitely a lot of big Elon fanboys, and I'm not one of them. I think he's great, but, I'm curious to get your take.
Okay, so this is such a great question. And I love that you're interviewing me on this show now. So I love this. This is, it's a real conversation. So I feel like, and this is my perspective, right? But I feel like Elon could be more it's hard to think that he could be more successful. He could be more successful if he thought of things differently. Okay. And I'll give you an example. When when he did all of the work for the government, obviously, I think in my view, It was work that needed to be done. I mean, the moving forward of all of this, I agree. I think that overall, like, the government was bloated. I think we needed to be more efficient. I think we need to have better practices. I agreed with everything he did. The way he did it, I think, could have been much better. I think the way he went about it, and maybe what he did was kind of like gung ho, and we're slashing tires around, things like, I just think that the way he did it, he could have done it differently. And I think he would have saved a lot of money and pain on the workers at Tesla, because that was the reason. I think majority of the people who pushed back on Tesla after he did all the work he did with the government was really because of the way he did it, not what he did. So I think he lost a lot of money business-wise because he didn't approach it in a way that maybe the, leadership maturity mindset, maybe he could have had a little more,
Felicia, this is, by the way, I love this. And this is what I would call a piping hot take. The idea that Elon could have been more successful if he had changed his leadership style slightly is like an amazing insight.
Think about it all the time. I do. I really do. I'm like, he just called me before he made that statement. I'm like, it would have gone, he would have saved $1 billion.
Let me send him a text real quick.
I always want to call him. Not that I have his number, but I just want to be like, can you just ping me before you make, that move, and like, let me walk you through it. And sometimes taking a little bit longer to do something, maybe, like I said, it would have saved all the backlash and, quite frankly, like the bullshit that he had to deal with afterwards. He probably set himself back months of time and money because he had to now deal with the press and deal with all the backlash that was happening with Tesla, and people were going after employees of Tesla. And then he had to go and talk to the stakeholders and of his company. I mean, that takes time and conversation and being present and flying places. He lost a lot of money because he didn't do it the proper way. I mean, in my opinion, right? So
yeah, and he had a great and building on that, and he had a great opportunity to make a significant change in government, and it was the medium, not the message, that may have been at fault. And to be frank, I was very excited about Doge. Like, coming out of the election, I stay pretty apolitical, to be totally honest, but I don't think there's anyone who's like anti-efficiency. No one's like, let's waste more money. And I was interested to see what somebody with a little bit of an outsider perspective could do. And I'd seen him be very effective inside of Tesla and other businesses. I think Twitter, that was like a micro litmus test, right? He came into Twitter and folks thought, okay, this is going to collapse. He did lean out the organization a lot. I think there's still open questions about the quality of the social media there now, but sometimes he takes a lot of risks and it works. But I guess here's I'll thread the needle forward one step, and I'll ask you one more question on this, which is, I agree that he could have been more successful, which is actually you've convinced me of this. Richest man in the world, but there's many other metrics. He could have probably done better financially and reputationally with a slight moderation of approach. But, and here's the big question, is can all of these characteristics be bundled into the same person? One thing I've learned is that people are spiky. They're not divisible. It's like video game characters. You can allocate 100 points across, and the same person that's like super empathetic may not have the same mind for math, or may not be disciplined, but they are super hardworking when they're interested in something. In my personal relationships, I find the same thing. Something that I love about somebody is something that's also like the biggest pet peeve at the same time. So people can't be separated and recombined, And so is it reasonable to think that the person who is an Elon Musk could also have those other characteristics that you think would make him more successful? Or do we feel like the evidence is borne out that look, there are other people more moderate in their approach who have not gotten to that level? So maybe that's like the peak of possible performance. You have to pick and choose.
I mean, I don't think you need to pick and choose. I think that this is the crux
Hmm.
of leadership development, right? This is where you understand the really hairy problem, which is understanding how and when to double down on your strengths and where to upskill some of those competencies that you need to really dig into and help
Hmm.
support, right? That are keeping you from being more successful than you are. But there's a balance. It's like, when do you double down on your strengths? And when do you tap into, a skill that you need to develop, and
Yeah.
understanding at what time and with who, and, at what moment? Is it something that you say? Is it something that you do? Is it something that you don't do? Right. And that is a constant development. I mean, that's leadership at its core. It's
Hmm.
understanding when to tap into certain things and when to use certain tools and when not to use certain tools in different environments and at
Hmm.
different paces, depending on the needs of the business. So, yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I think that it is a constant evolution and thinking of through the context that you're in and where you're going, but you always have to have a baseline and you always have to know where you're going in order to know when to use those tools and how often and so forth, right? So I think leaders who are really great at what they do can make that change in an instant. Like, they can go into the
Hmm.
meeting prepared all they want, but when they feel like what's actually going through the meeting in real time or a presentation or whatnot, they quickly adapt to say, oh, I don't need
Hmm.
that tool. I actually should go with this tool, right? And
Hmm.
that's the challenge. That's the biggest challenge. Yeah.
It's really interesting. Yeah,
I hope
it's
I've hoped
fascinating stuff.
I've tickled your brain a bit
No,
about.
I mean, certainly, like, you've inspired a lot of questions. I mean, I think that something that you've little Pandora's box of mine that you've accidentally opened is just this question about where is the higher return on investment to double down on your strengths or try to curtail your weaknesses. And in our business, we never hire somebody because of an absence of weakness, right? We always hire them because of a preponderance of strength in like a specific area. And I think that I'll share when I was at at Harvard Business School, you hear a lot of people come to speak, a lot of different advice. It's basically like an all-you-can-eat buffet of management advice. But there was one thing that really stuck with me, like one specific piece of advice, and I'll share it with you. And it was from Dan Doctoroff, who was the founder of Sidewalk Labs. And I didn't hear this from him directly. I heard it from a friend of mine, Claire, so I'll give her credit. This is the paraphrasing of the thing that I heard that sat with me, which was, have you ever had a moment where you realize that something that is easy for you is hard for everybody else? That's your strength. People often make the mistake when they think about their strengths of contemplating something that was really difficult, really challenging, and they worked super hard and they finally overcame it and they think, oh, that's my strength. No, that's your weakness. That's the thing that you had to work really hard at in order to be successful in. Your strength is something that comes to you so naturally that you can almost not comprehend how other people find it so difficult. And so that really stuck with me. And so that's kind of a nice thing. It's like, okay, if something's easy, go with easy. If something feels natural, go with natural. Don't try to force yourself to be really good at something that is actually really difficult for you. Now, the caveat, of course, I believe that, of course, like doubling down your strengths, you get the highest ROI. I remember when I was trying to learn foreign language when I was in high school and middle school, even college a little bit. It's just not my strength. I could study like 5 times as hard and still be 10 times worse than my peers. And so at a certain point, you just say, okay, this is not where I should spend my time. But there are some weaknesses that are, that can be career limiting. And so I think the balance of what are like the must cover bases versus the leaning into the things that are really your strength is a very personal challenge. But I'm curious, like, how does that sit with you?
Well, I could talk about this forever, but I think the end all, like the bottom line is that I think the biggest challenge is that people just don't know what their strengths are.
Hmm.
And it's really hard to capitalize on what their strengths are without knowing
Hmm.
what they are. And sometimes you take like a strengths finder assessment. Sometimes you're being told feedback. A lot of that feedback is wrong and it's contextual and it's narrow minded or
Yeah.
biased. So first, having a true unbiased understanding of what your strengths are is the biggest piece of the puzzle in regards to how much work you have to do. And then once you know and you're aware of it and you have that self-awareness, then that's when like that last 5% of being able to use it is really easy.
It's interesting. What portion of people do you think have sort of some level of self-awareness of their strengths? And I mean in not like a subconscious way. I mean like in a proactive, I've asked myself this question. I at least have a hypothesis about 2 or 3 things that I know I'm, really good at.
Well, Spencer, as much as I want to have this conversation, we are out of time and I can't wait to have the next conversation with you. So this is not the end, but just the beginning. So thank you for being here.
Felicia, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much for the time. Great conversation.
Absolutely. Visit us at leaderbook.ai. Your support as a subscriber means the world to us. So thank you for tuning in. I'm Felicia Shakiba. Let's connect on LinkedIn.